So this video is kind of probably be called an ImaQTPie response video, but it's not responding to any drama or something like that. It's responding to his episode of Beyond the Rift with Scarra that he did this week with Meddler, because in that video, they talked about, again, the whole idea of moving mages and possibly fighters to the bottom lane, and so QTPie kind of mentioned some things that might be problematic for those kinds of champions going against ranged champions, as well as sustain that they could possibly have. So that's why I'm doing a gameplay video instead of an animation video, because in this particular game that I'm showing, I played against a mage bottom lane. Now, sure, we kind of had one of the best level 1s ever, in which case we invaded, we set Scarra behind, we even killed him, Zone LeBlanc made her blow both of her summoners, and then stole red buff away as well. So this is a little bit of an asterisk next to it, because the laning phase went super well because of that. But even if it didn't, I feel like one of the points that ImaQTPie brought up is that with the sustain that we have as marksmen with things like fleet footwork, it would make it very hard, especially for a melee champion, to actually do battle with us in this lane. So as this laning phase went on, of course there was a couple, exceptions in this particular case. It was very easy for her just to avoid LeBlanc and make sure she couldn't do anything to me or Ivern as this game went on. Because the problem with mages is, especially in the early game, they're going to burst more so than anything else, right? If they're a damage over time mage, even in the early game, they're probably known for maybe more of a burstier combo because a lot of people have a lot less health, whatever the case is, stuff like that. So if you can't burst me as an AD carry, I'm going to have to sustain with fleet footwork to just heal that back up. And if the lane was really bad, instead of Doran's Blade, I could have went Doran's Shield even if I thought it was going to be that bad of a lane, but it wasn't. And so there is a lot of sustain that's right now accessible to the AD carry role very early. And as an AD carry player, you would think like people like me and ImaQTPie maybe wouldn't complain, but we kind of want to be open-minded and also open to the fact of if you really want to do this, this is maybe what you have to do to be successful. Now, the only thing I will counter-argue is I don't necessarily think that maybe sustain itself is the problem. I think maybe that there aren't enough tools then for those lane bullies or mages, especially fighters, to be able to do enough work against the sustain that AD carries will have. Right now, I'm looking at the AD carry role on champion.gg, and I know that's not maybe that's the best place to look at win rates and stuff, but Jinx, for example, is suddenly the #1 AD carry. Why? Because a lot of AD carries have been nerfed, so she's kind of one of the only ones left that kind of got recently buffed and not nerfed. And even then, she's sitting at less than a 53% win rate. I'm not making this video say, oh, AD carries are weak, please leave AD carries alone. I think what I'm trying to say though here is, if you go about the nerfing stuff, then eventually everything's going to eventually feel bad because everything's just been nerfed instead of buffing stuff. Right now, things like Draven and Lucian, who are supposed to be lane bullies, you probably don't really fear them all that much. You probably have a better chance fearing Kog'Maw with a recurve bow when he decides, hey, I'm going to go 1v5 the enemy team mid lane with this recurve bow, and I'm going to meet you at Baron when it spawns, because that's okay for a late game, mid game, early game monster. What is Kog'Maw? Anyway, of course I'm biased. I think Jinx is probably the most balanced hyper carry out of the hyper carries right now, because you can't make a counter argument to me that Tristana is more balanced than Jinx, I'm just saying. But anyway, let's just get off the bias train, if you will, and go back to mages and fighters. I'm starting with mages first because at least they have range. Even if they can't burst you, maybe they can do something there. And there was a change last season that they might be able to just revert and maybe solve a little bit of this problem when I'm talking about the sustain and stuff. Well, one of the weakness of the AD carry role was they used to not scale magic resist, so that you could burst them, especially in the mid game. They don't have any magic resist. If they want magic resist, they better have had it in runes, masteries, the old runes and masteries when those exist, by the way, or like buy a hex drinker early, something like that, because otherwise mages, you're gonna have a field day just popping AD carries. And now AD carries and kind of every champion in the game, they scale some sort of magic resist. Maybe they can revert that, especially now that those old masteries and runes are gone. You can't take magic resist in your runes and masteries, and then you can't have the scaling magic resist. Even though it's not that much, it's still somewhat, especially early in the lane phase, that can be impactful. So by taking that away, maybe you at least make mages have a better chance of being successful down there, because maybe they can burst a bit better. And even if the AD carry is going to sustain back up, they're going to probably spend a lot more time further back in the lane and focusing on healing back up, instead of being like, I'm already topped off, let's take another trade because whatever. So in other words, maybe you can burst people down and make them focus on making it a farming lane at least. I know people want to kind of smash their lane, kill their lane opponent, force them back to Fountain, get damage on tower and stuff like that. I don't know if all of those problems are going to be solved overnight, and I don't know if even reverting that change would be solved, combined with the fact that there aren't the old runes and masteries, in which case you could take magic resist from there as well. I guess what I'm saying is, I think part of it is that there's not enough damage being done, that even though you have sustain, you're not really having to be forced to go, hey, I have sustain and I have to, dictate or decide if I want to sustain back up to stay in lane, or am I topped off now so I can go and take another trade. Right now, it's just kind of the later, right? It's like, hey, I'm topped off, let's go take another trade. Another change that could be possible is also changing it so Fleet Footwork only heals off of trading with enemies. You can't do it with, trading off of minions, like healing off of minions with Fleet Footwork. I don't know if that would be great, because it seems like more of a nerf than a buff, and I just got done talking about don't nerf everything. But at the same time, you probably have Doran's Blade or Doran's Shield. You can still use minions and use that to heal off the minions, and then use Fleet Footwork to just heal off a trade specifically. Maybe that would hinder sustain a little bit without actually having to nerf the numbers or ratios on the healing itself. I'm not exactly sure that's a great idea either. As you know, maybe if you're new to this channel and you're watching this video, I kind of talk about certain topics, and then we kind of debate those topics, or at least just discuss those topics more in depth. What I'm saying isn't actually necessarily good ideas, I just provide talking points in case you don't necessarily have a talking point on this topic, but want to partake in the conversation anyway. So by all means, I'm saying these ideas, but I'm not saying this is what should happen, or these are great ideas. I'm just putting those out there because, hey, in the past, this is something that used to work against AD carries for mages by the mid game. If they're going to move to the bottom lane, maybe this is what could happen to make sure the mages can transition a bit better in the bottom lane. One of the complaints that came up when this idea was first announced, though, was what about poke mages like Azir and stuff? How do you make a lane interactive and not just make him poke people down forever, and then maybe because he has like a Janna, he's also protected if anyone tries to engage on him? One of the ideas that was brought up in a post that they made a couple weeks ago now was, well, maybe with mages, they work better with engaged supports. So that way, peeling supports don't really work as well on them, so that they don't have a lane like that. But maybe now switching to fighters, transitioning into fighters if you will, they work better with the peeling support, so that way they can actually worry about getting on top of an AD carry's face and trying to do work. Because it's going to be a 2-on-2 lane, so support's still going to be there, and honestly the better support can probably dictate that lane a lot more than even the AD carry. If a Yasuo wants to get on top of a Jinx with a Leona, he's going to have to worry about the Leona probably a lot more than the Jinx. So he's going to need something to work really well with him, like a Janna or a Sona or something like that. So maybe in a balanced sense, a little bit of tuning goes with that. If you're playing with the healing support and your melee, maybe you get, I don't know necessarily bonus stats, but maybe the synergy just works a lot better. Versus if you're playing something like Azir, you work better with something like a Thresh or a Leona or Alistar or something like that. So that you can't just stay back in lane like old Ziggs when he made it to the bot lane and just farm forever and make sure the lane is just not fun for all parties involved. So again, now switching over to fighters, fighters are going to be interesting because fighters can kind of already work. They're kind of on the threshold, on the brink of already working. There's just a little bit more systematic changes that need to change. Again, I bring up Mordekaiser once again in the video because when he first moved to bottom lane was when I was first branching out to other AD carries like Ezreal. And I wasn't really good on Ezreal, but Mordekaiser made me seem good on Ezreal in lane. Because at the end of the day, it works like this. I have range, you don't have range. You don't even have a hook support or something that I have to worry about dodging. You have a Thresh, but I can dodge his hook, and then you guys can pretty much never do nothing but eat my long range attacks. Melee champions would have to have something there to be able to help them deal with that. And I really don't want to say something that hinders my role, but at the same time, maybe that means more scaling armor. Right now, even AD carries scale some armor by themselves. Maybe melee champions, if they want to go in the bottom lane, need more armor. And I hesitate saying that because obviously, just because Yasuo would then maybe be able to go bottom lane, doesn't mean he won't be able to go mid and top lane and make those matchups terrible. I just understand that a lot of the community right now has some issues with AD carry and how safe maybe AD carries are. Maybe not because of the champions themselves, unless your name is Tristana, in which case that champion is just miserable. But in other words, is the crit power spike too cheap because of Zeal items or stuff like that. So I don't want to make it so that then suddenly we make that role maybe almost too weak, and then something like Yasuo is just out of control in comparison because we wanted to make sure he could have a good matchup with a Jinx Leona. You know what I'm saying? So that's a point of discussion I want to pass off to you guys as well. Fighters seem like it's going to be the interesting one to work because they're going to have to do a lot more work in lane to succeed, and unless you do something like maybe buff scaling armor or whatever, which they could make them worse or worse to play against in other roles, how do you really address fighters more so than mages? Mages, I think you can get away with just lowering the magic resist on AD carries, and so that the burst can be more meaningful, and the AD carry has to then decide, do I want to sustain to stay in lane? Do I want to just back because forget this? Or do I want to, maybe try and top off and take a trade later? But it's going to be later because I'm going to need time to heal back up. So that's the idea I'm going to pass off to you guys to end this video on, is actually, how do you think fighters will be able to succeed in the bottom lane? What kind of changes will fighters have to get to be able to play in the bottom lane? And on top of that, make sure you go check out the episode of Beyond the Rift with ImaQTPie, Scarra, and they had Redler, Riot, Meddler, and Stash on there as well. It was actually a pretty great episode in my opinion. A lot of really unbiased opinions and good discussion happening, so I'll probably link that in the description below if it's possible. But that's all for this video. I don't know which video will be next, because life be quite a mess. So until next time, take care from the Fire Guy FS, and thank you for watching.